As creatives, we all struggle with the art of creation, whether we're putting words on a page, so putting pen to paper, composing a melody, or a chorus, or a symphony. We all have that struggle to create every now and then, wherein while there is that passion and there is that desire, there's also something that stops us from creating, a kind of block, so to speak. Whether some people would call it writer's block or just a normal creative block. Now, of course, different creators have different creative processes. Let's say, for example, when it comes to writing, there are some writers who are plotters and some who are discovery writers. So the plotters would be more inclined to outlining basically their story or their novel, whereas the discovery writers lean more towards writing off the cuff. They used to be called pantsers because they would write at the seat of their pants. Basically, that was the expression for it. But anyway, discovery writers were more of the classical image of writers, wherein they would just write whatever comes to mind or whatever they thought of at the moment, and that would appear on the page. And those two are pretty standard and common examples of how the creative process differs per person, because some people would really prefer to have to have everything organized, have everything structured, whereas others would just want it free form, would prefer improvisation. Now, while people have different ways to go about the creative process, the fact still remains that we all struggle with creating or with being creative in general. And through all the books that I've read, there are many creatives that have these tips and suggestions for how to overcome that struggle to create or how to overcome those blocks. And while they all give these different pieces of advice, one thing I've found that sort of connects all of these different pieces of advice together is the fact that, we're all human. We all have to deal or have to overcome the struggles of the human body, of the human psyche, of the human experience. And through my own experimentation with all these different tips and advices on how to overcome the creative struggle, I found a couple that have really worked for me and that I'd like to share with everyone out there. Now, some of these tips I've gathered from various books, from books about creativity to books about productivity or habit building. And many of them I've found to be really helpful, even though maybe sometimes, I'm not perfect. I don't get them right all the time, and I'm not able to form these habits as best as I can. But whenever I do, and whenever I practice these pieces of advice, I found that my creativity thrives or works better, so much more compared to when I don't practice them. So the first piece of advice I'd like to give for you creatives out there is to create an environment where you don't feel stifled, you don't feel boxed in or stuffy, so to speak. Or you create an environment basically or a space where your creative juices sort of get you going. It helps get your creative juices going, basically. And that it helps you really think about your art or what it is you want to do or want to create. So this is something I've seen in several books about building and creating good habits that help you stay productive. And I think it works just as well for that creative space. So when you think about the space you're creating in, whether that's your work desk, your studio, wherever you like to create your art, you want to create as little friction as possible between you and your ability to do the work. One example that was given in one of the books I read is the author wanted to learn how to play the guitar, but that would mean practicing chords, different kinds of chords, learning how to play the chords, learning the musical scales, and he would have to maintain a daily practice of practicing these chords and scales so that he would be able to get better at the guitar. So what he would do is he would put the guitar in the middle of the room, out of its case, on a stand, all primed and ready for him to just sit down and strum a few chords and scales. And he found that when he did this, compared to keeping it inside the guitar case, wherein you step into your room, you have to take it out of the guitar case, and then you have to find the proper space to sit down, play the guitar. You compare that versus already having the guitar ready and waiting for you, basically. It's waiting for you, it's sitting right there, and it's waiting for you to play it. There's less friction, there's less chance or possibilities for distraction, and it's easier basically for you to just go in, play the guitar for half an hour maybe, and then get out. And then you've completed your habit for the day. So that's what prepping your environment basically is. So when it comes to writing, maybe it's turning off the Wi-Fi, turning off the internet, or having your writing apps automatically open once you turn on your computer. One tool that I found really useful for this is the FreeWrite. The FreeWrite is basically, think of it like a typewriter with an e-ink screen. So like a typewriter with a Kindle screen, basically. And its only function is to help you get your writing done. So there's no other apps on that device other than the screen that's available for typing. Basically, you can't do anything else. You can't be distracted by anything else. And I found that using that FreeWrite actually gave me more freedom to create and more space, headspace, a lot more headspace to create compared to opening a laptop, finding your writing app, and then trying to write from there. Basically, the idea is there that you want to create as little friction between you and your work as possible. The second tip I'd like to give is to just start. And what this means basically is to, many of us, we have to warm our engines before we can get going. And so it takes a while for you to really feel creative when you're just sitting there, when you've just sat down basically, and you're trying to create something, but you don't know where to go or what to do. You don't know how to start. So the idea is to just start. Just do something to get your hands moving and to get your brain working basically to solve those creative problems that you're having right at the moment. One thing I found is that for writers, for example, you can start a timer for 10 minutes or 5 minutes, even 5 minutes actually, wherein for 5 minutes, you would just write anything that comes to mind. Doesn't matter what it is. Don't try to censor yourself. Don't try to restrict yourself. Just write anything that comes to mind. And the act of starting actually gets your juices flowing, gets your brain flowing, and it helps you ease up. It helps you open up a bit more compared to if you're just sitting there staring at the blank page, wondering what to write, and then you can't get started because it's difficult for you to start on the right foot. Basically, you want to start on the right foot, but you can't because you're trying to be sort of a perfectionist in the way that you do things. You don't want to make any mistakes. But the idea is to just start. Just get started. Don't worry about what comes out for the next 5 to 10 minutes. Just write. And sooner or later, you'll get into the flow. And that's the part where you want to find yourself in when you're creating your art. In the flow. And to get into that flow, you have to warm your engines. You have to warm up, basically. Like any workout, when you think about health and fitness in general. Before you get into the more grueling work part of the workout, you want to warm up your body and make sure it's primed and ready for all that stretching, all that muscle stretching and muscle breaking that you're going to be doing throughout your workout routine. So the same is true with creative work. Warm yourself out by just starting with anything. So one thing I found very helpful is one thing that Julia Cameron talks about in her book, The Artist's Way. So she mentioned something called the morning pages, where in her version, she recommends that basically take out a journal and write down 3 handwritten pages of just straight out stream of consciousness writing. So basically, that's just write anything that comes to mind. Don't try to censor it. Don't try to block it. Just allow yourself to write anything, whether even if the thing that you're writing is I don't know what to write. I don't know what to write. Even if you repeat that over and over again for 3 pages, the thing is that eventually you'll come to a point where things will just sort of flow and you stop trying to censor yourself and you stop trying to be perfect, so to speak, in the way that you're doing things. And so I found that whenever I do Julia Cameron's morning pages, there's much more freedom, basically, much more creativity, much more ideas flow, basically. Ideas flow so much better whenever I do those morning pages because it gets me out of the mindset that everything has to be perfect and everything has to be great or awesome or excellent from the outset. And it gives me that permission to fail, which is my next tip for you creatives out there. Give yourself permission to fail. This is another idea that Anne Lamott talks about in her book, Bird by Bird. And it's the idea that you should allow yourself to make mistakes, basically. You don't have to create something perfect. You don't have to think that everything you write has to be a masterpiece, because it really doesn't. And the more that you give yourself permission to fail, the more that you'll actually be able to create something and put it out there and put something on the page without having to worry about what is it that comes out. Another tip that I recommend is to work in sprints. There's this technique called the Pomodoro method, wherein you set a timer for 25 minutes basically, and in those 25 minutes, you'll be super laser focused with your work. And by super focused, this means that you're not letting anything distract you from your work. So basically, you're just really focused for those next 25 minutes. All you need to do is your work, whether that's your writing, whether that's your painting, your music. 25 minutes, no distractions. And then when the timer goes off after those 25 minutes, you set another timer for 5 minutes, wherein you allow yourself space to breathe, to relax, to take a break, basically. And then after those 5 minutes, you start another 25-minute round of laser focused work. And then a 5 minute break after. So basically, the Pomodoro method is just you repeating this 25-minute and 5 minute intervals so that you can eventually finish the work that you want to do. So it's just 25 minutes of laser focus and a 5 minute break to relax your brain, relax your muscles, relax any tension that you have, and just get ready basically for the next session or the next round. And so just these practices alone have helped me out a ton when it comes to doing creative work, when it comes to writing, because, just starting, giving myself permission to fail, and prepping my environment have really helped create less friction or lessen the friction between me and my creative work. Because what usually happens to all of us basically is that when we sit down to create, when we sit down to write, there's all these things that try to bombard us basically or distract us from doing the work. And as much as possible, you want to create habits and techniques that will lessen that friction and lessen that time we spend ruminating about whether our work is good enough, whether we're doing it correctly or properly. And that's the challenge basically of every creator, that imposter syndrome or that resistance that we're fighting against just to create the thing that we want to create. And as much as possible, you want to lessen the time you spend in that mindset and increase the time that you spend basically doing the work. And the more you're able to do that, the less and less of these blocks that you'll have. And so I hope that you try some of these out today and for the next week or so. See how they work for you, see how well they able to free you up and free up your mind and your headspace to be able to do the work that you've been wanting to do. Because I guarantee you, once you get started, once you start creating momentum around your creative work, things will just flow so much easier. I mean, in his book on writing, Stephen King even said that once he started creating momentum, that it was easier for him to write. And that's why he wrote every single day, 365 days a year. Even on his birthday, he would write. He would make sure he gets some writing done within the day. And he found that whenever he skipped a day, basically, he found it so much harder to get back into it. And I found that that's true for me as well. And I'm sure it's true for a lot of people. That once you skip a day of doing the creative work that you want to do, it gets so much harder to get back into it. The longer you take between your sessions, your art sessions, or your creative sessions, the much more difficult it becomes to get back into it. So, as much as possible, once you do these tips or once you create these habits and put them into your lifestyle, basically, you'll find that it's so much easier to even jump back into creating the work that you want to do.